Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's edition of RE331, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Death, written by wimdaddy. This war was different. For millennia, I've seen humanity in contest with itself. I've witnessed more battles than there are stars in the sky. I've seen the common sight of men dying in the mud repeat itself. I hear the same prayers. Millions of voices calling for the mothers or their gods, or an end to it all. Calling for me to take them away and give them peace. Though this war was different, not even I could imagine the scale at which men sent themselves to the slaughter. The war to end all wars, I heard one soul say before a bullet entered his head and took his soul from his body. The Great War, said the newspaper that another had been reading when the shell landed 3 feet away from him, blowing him to pieces. I'll tell you this now for a particular moment. From what I have seen of this Weltkrieg, it was not an uncommon occurrence, where one side agreed to get out of their holes and run at the enemy, while the other agreed to stay there and wait for them to come. Even before this, I carried dozens of souls to the beyond, comforting them as I picked them up from their blasted shelters in the mud and earth. It doesn't matter their age. They're always frightened. And then the whistles were blown. Boys, gave a roar and began to climb out of their holes straight at those chittering guns. Souls were given to me by the score. They were cut down in lines by the chattering of machines that spit lead like cherry pips. It reminded me of the image of cutting wheat with the sickle that everyone thinks I carry. I do not. It took me effort to do my duty, rather than stare at shock at the lives that ended right before my eyes. The fight reached the positions of those guns, and a more recognizable battle began, with fists and blades and clubs. I looked around as I did my task, diverting my eyes away from the slaughter all around me. Despite what I had seen, I never got used to the sight of bloodshed. But as I looked around, I had a sense of familiarity. I recognized those flat fields, with a smattering of trees here and there. I recognized this river. This is not my first battle upon this stretch of land. I remember the shining shields and banners with dragons and arrows, and the whine of the cavalry stuck in the mud. I remember earlier than that as well. Half-naked men with great beards and axes, charging at soldiers lined up, their red rectangle shields making an unassailable wall. I woke from my memories. How long had passed? The souls in my arms accumulated, letting me hold them until I took them through the veil. I waited, though. There was still more to collect. That was where I saw them. 2 men jostling around in the muddy ditch that they called a trench. One was dressed in grey, the other a brownish green. The one in grey wore a steel helmet. The other wore a strange hat, folded up to the one side above the ear. From where they both came from, I wouldn't know. Here, there, it didn't matter for me. These places have had so many names I couldn't possibly remember what they are now. I decided to wait and watch, for one would surely end the other. This was a fight to the death, to me. Their fight took on a strange rhythm, a desperate thrust with a bayonet, a more desperate parry by the other, a push, a shove, a feint, a block. So focused upon each other, they took little notice of their surroundings. Soon, they were on the ground, jostling around in the oldest and most primal form of battle. Head to toe in mud, blades abandoned, they resorted to their fists. I remember getting impatient. I had places to be, souls to collect. But I knew that I wouldn't leave until this fight was done. I'd become interested in the outcome. Which one of these poor souls was to die? The grey or the green? And then it happened. The moment I wanted to tell of. Exhausted and wounded, the men both paused for a moment, and like waking from a dream, they simultaneously took note of their surroundings. For a while they'd been fighting, with blades and fists and hands. The battle had passed over them without either noticing. Their only other company were the dozens of dead and wounded. Not another could be seen in any direction. They looked around, then at each other, and then they stopped fighting, just giving up on their goal to kill each other. The green-dressed man with a strange hat rolled off the grey and lied next to him, both breathing breathlessly. They just stayed there, no different looking than any other around them, only that their hearts were still beating. And then the green man started to laugh. I cannot tell you what of. Perhaps the relief of being alive, or the ridiculousness of the situation, or just insanity. He chuckled in a sort of bemused way. I could not look away now. I let the war out of my mind for a moment and focused on these two. The one in grey looked at him in the same perplexed expression that I wore, but after a while, he also began to chuckle exhaustedly. They both pulled themselves out of the mud after they finished, dragging themselves to a sitting position with their backs against the parapet. While this happened, I moved closer, picking up souls of the slain as I went. I stood opposite and looked closely as the man in the green reached for his breast pocket. When he removed his dirty, bloody hand, it contained a matchbook and a cigarette. Twice he tried to strike the match alight, but the man's hand was shaking too much. It wasn't until the grey-dressed man took the matchbox from him that it was successfully lit. Cupping the flickering flame with his hand, he held it up to the cigarette on the other's mouth. The green man took a long draw, and after looking at the other, he gave it over. "Dunker," said the grey man, taking his own puff before giving it back. "No worries," said the green man with a strange hat. For thousands of years, I've seen humanity do its utmost best to obliterate itself. I've seen countless fields full of the dead. I've seen towns burn and cities turn to rubble and dust. I've seen, as they come up, as far more imaginative ways to kill each other. The two men in front of me didn't hate each other. They had simply been doing what they were meant to do. But when the time came, they both knew that the other was just as frightened as they were. How could they go and commit those unspeakable horrors and still remain so compassionate, kind, alive, human? Once again, I am perplexed by humanity. The man in green got up, offering the man in grey a hand. He pointed behind him, back to his own lines. The man in grey's war was over. Shrugging off his rifle and ammo belt, the man in grey stood as well. I watched as they walked like two men who had known each other all their lives with their backs facing me. Of course, I would meet them both again, but that is a sadder story. End of story. I would like to thank our T5 members and patrons, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Vidmori, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.